My internet is like that.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Very happy to welcome tonight's author chat. I'm going to let you introduce yourself so I know how to pronounce your name properly.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Dugald Bruce Lockhart, and I am an actor and a writer. And these are my books here: The Lizard, Trying to Get the Camera, and Second Skin. Yes, I've been acting for about 30 years, and Second Skin was published in hardback in May. And I think some of you guys might have read it.
Do you want to give us a little bit about what they're about?
Yes, it's a follow-up novel to The Lizard, and The Lizard basically takes place 5 years after The Lizard finishes. The Lizard was set in 1988 on the island of Paros in Greece, and it was about a conspiracy where the protagonist, Alistair Haston, is framed for murder and then is on the run for his life in the Greek islands. This takes place after he's been to jail in Athens, then proved innocent. And then he gets a phone call at his dead-end telesales job. He's waiting to start a teaching job overseas. He gets a phone call from the father, of his child's mother, saying that he's been involved in an accident in Greece. And as far as Alistair is concerned, he doesn't have a child. And then he remembers a one-night stand. It all sounds rather lascivious, in Greece from 5 years ago on Paros, and realizes that this must be the progeny of that. And he goes back over to help Amara and the boy called Max. But when he gets there, he finds that all is not as it seems. He's intercepted by MI6, who basically tell him that his son has been involved in a mafia ransom kidnap plot, and they coerce him to join in and save the boy and help them. I can't tell you any more than that, of course, because I would have to shoot you. But I spent several holidays in Zakynthos, and I always thought it's a beautiful island, and it would be a perfect setting for the follow-up. So it's part of a series, but you don't need to have read The Lizard, I think, as Kaz would hopefully agree, to understand it. I hope. I'd be curious to know the truth about that, because I think most people read the first one first. But anyway, so that's a kind of potted, slightly clumsy introduction to the story.
I think it probably would help if you read the first one first, but you can read it as a standalone. It did make sense.
That's good. That's good, because it's always slightly clunky trying to get backstory in without it sounding too much like backstory, and keeping it sort of forward moving and hopefully gripping, dramatic, tense. But anyway, I'm glad it worked a bit.
Are these your first like crime thriller-esque novels? Have you written other things before that, or?
No, so The Lizard was my debut novel. That was 2019, and this is my set. I mean, I've always written, I've always told stories. I was a singer-songwriter for a while. I'm an actor and a director, so storytelling has been in my blood probably since I was very young. I kept diaries from the age of about 8 or 9, and I grew up overseas, so I've always enjoyed travel. So my books have a strong element of travel and adventure to them. I think that because that rubbed off on me. So yes, but I'm writing the third one now. So yeah.
Yeah, grew up overseas, born in Fiji. Apparently.
Yes. My dad was working for the Overseas Development Fund out there at the time in '68, and then he left to join what, as I discovered later, and as is now publicly known, he joined the Secret Service. At the time, we thought he was a diplomat, but then when he told us when I was about 13, 14, what he actually did. But so we were brought up in various countries, and he and my mum were diplomats. And then when he died in 2018, in the obituary, it explained that he was actually SIS. So I think coming from that background, I've been sort of nudging my protagonist ever closer to the Secret Service world, having been, I found out that I'd been scouted when I was at St Andrews University and deemed unsuitable for the profession, which is obviously why I became an actor. And then I write.
Oh, what story that is. So is that why they're set in Greece? Is that somewhere you've lived?
Yeah, so I went to school in Cyprus, in Nicosia, from just after the Turkish-Greek War in 1976 to 1978, 79, and then went to boarding school. And we always went to Greece on holiday, even after that, when we were living in Nigeria and then Vienna, which is where book 3 is set. But I've always loved Greece. I've always loved Greek food, Greek music. And The Lizard is actually not based on, because there's murder and other graphic things in there, which I never did. But it's based on a trip I took when I was 20. And I spent 3 months sleeping rough out there and working. And I went to go and, I suppose, find myself would be the expression. But actually, I pretty much lost myself. I lost most of my mind and my sense of reality. And yes, ended up in all sorts of strange scrapes. And I thought for 20, 30 years that there had to be a story in there. And so finally got it down with the help of a writing mentor and now my literary agent. So yes, I was very great. And I was actually performing in Mamma Mia at the time. So I was in a show about Greece, writing a story about Greece, two very, very different. One fluffy and fun and bouncy and musical, and the other one rather dark and twisted.
That must have been quite fun doing Mamma Mia at the same time as writing about Greece.
It was. I mean, it was. I also saw the film, but there was just something about being in. I thought it was sort of rather serendipitous, and that it was fate, and the fact that it took me. I mean, for about 15 years, I'd only written 3 chapters of this book, and I'd written it in the third person, and it was very autobiographical. It was very much a journal style. There was going to be no murder in it, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. And I remember meeting a published novelist at a barbecue in St. Albans and telling him that I had this idea. And he said to me that no one's going to want to read that. He says, if you want somebody to read your story, you've got to put a murder in it. And I said, yeah, but I didn't murder anybody. And he said, well, make it up. And I thought, yes, of course, make it up. So I stopped worrying about it being accurate to my trip in 1988. And I started writing what could have happened. And all of a sudden, and then I met this guy, Jeff Orvan, and I worked with him online. I'd send him a chapter every 2 weeks and we'd talk about it and he'd discuss it and I'd move on. And then I think I wrote it in 9 months, and it was my first 9 months of being in Mamma Mia. And yes, it was great to be in the dressing room, writing about Greece, hearing the music, coming through the tannoy, getting into my Greek stuff, doing a bit of Greek dancing. It all helped.
We've got some hellos from Sarah and Leslie.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, Leslie.
We'll find out if they've read the book as we go, I guess.
I can't see them. Is that right?
No, they're commenting. It's not pulling it through onto here. Normally we see it on the side, but
okay.
It's not playing for us today and giving us comments on the side of the screen, but I can see them. And then Sarah said hello, and so has Leslie.
So are people tuning in from around the UK, or is it a Europe-wide thing? Or
Ooh, our book group is worldwide. We've got members all over the world.
Oh, really? So people right now could be anywhere?
Yep. I'm going to guess that Sarah's in Yorkshire because she lives not far away. She was in Harrogate at the weekend.
Okay.
And Leslie is UK-based as well.
Yorkshire, yes. I went to school in, I guess it's Cumbria, Sedbergh, near Kendal. It used to be Yorkshire. It's now Cumbria, I think.
Yeah.
But they haven't got. Okay, so I'm trying to see. So I don't see any. If I put show chat, okay, I can't see chat. Okay, so there's no chat at the moment.
Yeah, it's not coming up. It's not pulling it through to our chat.
Right.
So we won't see it at the moment. Sorry, but I can tell you it because I've got it playing on my phone as well.
Okay.
See the comments on the group. So I'm intrigued. Before we go into more about Second Skin, I'm intrigued into this you being scouted at university story. How did you find out about that and being unsuitable?
I'd written a play, and my parents came up. They were living in Nigeria at the time, but they were on leave, and they came up to St Andrews to watch the play. And we were in the car going back to my digs. And I was sitting in the back seat, and I leant forward and I said to Dad, so do you think I could be in the firm, as we referred to it, while you're still in it. And there was a long pause, and then he turned to my mum in the passenger seat and said, "Do you want to tell him or shall I?" And I was thinking, what? And then mum turned around and said, "Darling, they've checked you out and they've deemed you unsuitable. I've since found out," and I always thought it might be my international relations tutor who was a scout. And then recently somebody got in touch with me because they published this. It was in the Express, I think. It came up, and he'd read it and said, "Oh, I know who that was," but he hasn't told me who it is yet. Well, he mentioned a name that I don't remember, but then it was a long time ago, and my memory of my international relations tutorials are dim, faint. But yes, I did want to. It was definitely something I thought about. I never thought about being an actor until until quite a bit later at university. I always like to think that I didn't get in, perhaps because I couldn't get in while my dad was still in it. You know, I wasn't drinking excessive amounts of beer at that time. I think I was fairly well behaved. Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure why. I'd love to know why. I'd love to sit down with HR and go, so what was what was wrong with me?
Yeah, what made me unsuitable? It's such a good story. I think it's always better being unsuitable.
Do you know what?
Sorry.
I'm glad you say that. That's yes, I think so. It's a bit more rock and roll, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think someone very kindly said to me, just to make me feel better, I think, "Oh, Douglas, because you're too not flamboyant." I can't remember the word they used, but to be in the MI6, you have to blend in and not, you've got to sort of blend into the background and keep a low profile. Keep your head down. Be the man in the grey suit, woman in the grey suit. And I was never very good at being quiet and in the background. So I think the acting profession suited me more. Not that I'm like that. I mean, I'm obviously older and mature than when I first started my acting, but the acting world is definitely, not the world of the MI6. Although, in fact, I think when my dad joined, and because his father was also in the Secret Service, he was number 2 during the Second World War, and he helped set up Secret Service stations in Malta and in Italy. But I think in those days it was less. Now you have to basically have a first degree, a straight first class honors, and you've got to be very au fait with your maths, with logic. In those days, it was more about people, languages, and networking. And I think I'd be good at that side of it. I think I'd be less good at the technical side of it. And I guess they have to have a cutoff somewhere. I think you've got to be very, very sharp. I think it's different from someone who is going to be an agent or a field agent or someone who's being used to help make connections. But in terms of being an intelligence officer, a case officer, I think you have to be a fantastic linguist with 2 or 3 fluent languages under your belt. And although I speak German fairly fluently and a bit of French, I probably don't have the capacity to be bilingual in it. But I can put it all in this, you see. He can live the life that I never lived. And in fact, in book 3 in Vienna, which is where we were posted, I'm actually thinking I'm going to write my family into it. My dad, certainly. I think it's going to be one of the main characters, under a different name, of course. But it's my way of honoring my family upbringing and past, and having fun going down memory lane and rewriting the story and being at the center of it in the job that I was never allowed.
You have quite an interesting just backstory of yourself. Did you not have some rugby playing?
Yes, this is true. My great uncles, various uncles, played rugby and cricket for Scotland. One of them supposedly brought the googly back from South Africa. How true that is, I don't know, but he did get 9 wickets in one match playing this googly, which no one had really heard of before. Yes, no, I come from a fairly long line of. I mean, I'm sporting, but I'm not at that ability. Did like cricket. Yes, they played rugby, squash. I think apparently the Bruce Lockhart family at one point, just before the war, took on the American national team at real tennis. Didn't know there was one, and they beat them, which is very pleasing for the Bruce Lockharts anyway. So yes, I sort of grew up with quite a a tradition of achievers in the family, I guess, which I don't think put any pressure on, or well, maybe subconsciously. But the great story was, where is it? I've got the book somewhere here. My great uncle, Sir Robert Bruce Lockhart, was framed for an assassination attempt on Lenin during the Bolshevik Revolution, and locked up in the Kremlin, and then exchanged for a Bolshevik spy, Kerensky, over here, and then sentenced to death in absentia. And he wrote a book called Memoirs of a British Agent, which was then turned into a film in Hollywood in 1936 with Leslie Howard playing him. And then Bertie, who was known in the family, his son wrote a TV series called Riley Ace of Spies, starring Sam Neill. And so there's a, and at the time I didn't know that I was obviously going to go into television and theatre acting, although weirdly one of my last TV roles I ended up playing the Deputy High Commissioner in Fiji, and I thought that was a wonderful sort of round circle, having been born in Fiji and been brought up in the diplomatic, to then play a High Commissioner in it's called Castaways. It's a Paramount series written by, oh my gosh, the name has slipped me now. Anyway, yeah, I'm waffling, sorry.
It's all right. So
Lucy Clark, that's it, Lucy Clark.
So you're writing your family into book 3. How much of you, I know you said you started with this trip that you went on in the 80s. How much of you is kind of in your main character?
I think a lot of my natural observations. I think there's quite a lot of, yes, in terms of some of my philosophy. I'm not, as I would like to think, as green as the character when he first sets out, but he goes on a very long journey. He was I was always slightly prone to fall in love and kind of suffer for it, and I think he's definitely that character when I was younger, and he's that character. But then he goes through a rites of passage in The Lizard. In the second one, he's more wily, and also he's a philosopher and German student, which I was. So there are connections. It does go back to university. It's set in Putney, which is where I live too. So there are definite strands of me in it. Book 3 is my first venture away from the Greek island setting, and it's more of an espionage story than the adventure thriller, which the last one was and the one before. So I'm curious. I'd like to think that he will develop as I've developed over the last 30 years. So he becomes more adept, really, and less dupable as he is in the very first novel, which I was when I went to Greece that time. But it wasn't because I was green so much as I became feral, and I really was relying, stealing food off people's plates to live. I ran out of money. Got into all sorts of bad company, and I sort of ended up not really knowing what I thought about anything. So I'm trying to match all of that up in there. Yeah.
Whereas he's kind of a bit lost in book 2, isn't he? In that all of these things have happened to him before.
Yeah.
I don't think he quite knows where he sits on anything.
Yes, that's right.
In that book, does he? He's not quite sure what he thinks of many things, I don't think.
Yeah. And the reason he goes ahead, and this is, again, I recognize this from being when I was younger, is that he gets this idea that Amara is the one. And this is what kind of keeps him on that track, that it's fate, that this, she's been brought back into his life with the son. So I can't give away what actually happens and what really happens. But once he's in The Lizard, he's more on the run from everybody. In this, he's part of the plot moving forward, still doesn't know who anyone is. And when I wrote it, I had to make sure that I didn't repeat The Lizard. And also I tried to write it on more levels of deceit for the reader, I think. But he is still he's caught out. He's outmaneuvered. But again, I don't really want to give that away for those that haven't read it. In book 3, obviously you can't play that one again. So I've got to find a different where he stands with each one. Because equally, I don't just want to write another spy story, because there's lots of brilliant spy writers out there with whom I couldn't compare. But yes, you're right. He goes out. He's directionless, as his flatmate says to him at the beginning of part 2. He's looking for a project, and he thinks that she's the project, and he is. At the age of 26, 27, his flatmate's got the car, the house, the career, and he doesn't. He still hasn't found what he's looking for, and so, like many of us who don't know what we're looking for, we put it into somebody or something else, whether that's people, sport, drink, hobbies, obsessions, and then. But I think gradually he's growing up. I'd like to think that anyway.
I think he grows up a bit over the course of the book, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I think that's true. I'm kind of interested into why you think you wouldn't. Your comment about the spy thrillers, because obviously with a family of Secret Service kind of background, you're surely one of the best placed people to write really good spy thrillers.
I think. I agree. You'd think that, and I think it's because I've read so many good. I mean, I'm friends with Charles Cumming, who is the most phenomenal spy writer. I've read all his books, and in fact, it was reading a couple of his that got me wanting to write more. And I've talked to him about this and how I can't read his books while I'm writing mine, because I just feel like I can't compare to what he's writing. But then we are writing different things, and his style is different from mine. And I've read lots of Le Carre, but I'm not quite sure. I think I have to base mine. I mean, Charles doesn't come from a spy background, although he was approached by MI6 and did some of the interviews. I never got that far. But I think maybe book 3, I'm starting to head that way. But again, it's very much, I like to write from the layman's point of view rather than the professional, in the same way that I didn't go down the procedural route in The Lizard, because I didn't want to get in, the ranks of detectives and all of this. Again, other people have done it brilliantly. And so I wanted to keep it still very much first person, as if I was in that situation, with the inexperience that I have. What would I do in that situation? What would I like to think I could do in that situation? But in order not to repeat the stories, I think he is heading towards the spy world official without giving it away.
Yeah, no, it's very hard to talk about it, isn't it, without giving much away. I guess going down the procedural line as well would be even harder, because it's set in Greece, so you'd have to find out what the Greek procedures and things were, which might be different to, well, slightly different, I would imagine. There's not going to be a lot of difference, but
yes. Well, funnily enough, when you said that, because I got an email via someone had read the book, The Lizard, and emailed me out the blue and said that he had been out there the same time I was, the year before. He'd spent 6 months in an Athens prison. He got caught up in all of this stuff, and he said that it was like he was reading his own story. And I'd love to know, I mean, I can't give his name. I don't know who he is or where he is now. But I remember at the time, people I knew there had spent, the night in the cellar, and it was the Greek police were known to be pretty tough on boisterous, drunken Brits, especially, and the Aussies who come over and work the islands, and a lot of Irish too. And they, I mean, some of the islands had quite a reputation for it, but the police were very tough, and if you cross lines, you could end up in there with and protocol went out the window because they were teaching you a lesson, which is fair enough. But I think it was known to be quite not brutal as in physically brutal, but they didn't feel they needed to play by the rules. And I suppose I just wanted to make sure that the world I created was legitimate within the parameters that I'd set up. And actually, since doing more and more research about it at the time as well, I found that most of the things in terms of the way the police behave is actually, could have happened. And in fact, sometimes you put on Netflix and you watch some of these true to life documentaries and you think, you wouldn't write that because no one would ever believe it. So actually, when people say things aren't realistic, I think what that means is they think or feel that you haven't set it up well enough for it to be plausible. But actually, and I think this is my point about life and the character. And I bring this into acting and directing. I think anybody in any situation could end up doing anything, because it's a survival thing. You know, people who have to eat their dead comrades in a plane crash. Most of us don't do that in everyday life, but put yourself in the right situation, you know, what could happen? But it's always pleasing, if that's the right word, when I read about something that makes me, oh, okay, that wasn't too far-fetched. I mean, I did spend the night on the run from a gang of people at knife point on Paris one night. And I remember thinking, God, what do I do if how far would I take this if I actually get caught? In terms of what would I do? I didn't have a knife myself, but I wasn't frightened. I was just in a very different place. It was, as I say, I'd become feral. Yeah.
I think there's a thing, isn't there, of, like you were saying, it's about how well you've written your characters.
Yes.
Maybe in the book, because if you're sold on the people and you believe in the people that you're reading, you will go along with the situations, like you'll believe that they could happen.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of intertwined in the character stories.
Yes. And I think what's interesting, I mean, one should never, as an actor, one should never read reviews about yourself in plays. And as an author, it's always, you know, tricky, because you get wonderful reviews and then you get reviews that are just slating, and you think, how can they, you know, how can that work? And actually, what is interesting is the people with who do connect with the character really connect with it, and those that don't really don't. And I suppose, I mean, it's a cliche to talk about the Marmite thing, but it is interesting and it's the same with acting too. You can do a play and they can love it and they can hate it. I suppose in the end, you just have to write for yourself. And if enough people like it and buy it, that's great. And if they don't like it, well, we all have different tastes in music. But what you're saying, though, which I think is really true and helpful, and it's something I try and achieve, about making sure the character has a degree of reality or create enough. But the thing is that I think even when you've done that, in the same way that people have different friends and have different things they like to do, you're not going to please everybody. So what I really don't want to do is write a kind of generic please all type of person, because you end up in the end not taking any risks. And I think in the end you just have to go, I'm going to write like this, and some people may hate it. And I suppose in the end it's a question of whether the books keep selling or not, I suppose.
The thing is, I don't mind a character I don't like.
Yeah.
In a book, do you know what I mean? I don't feel like I have to get on with them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or they have
no,
to.
I do.
And they have to be kind of realistic.
Yeah.
And if I hate them because they're a bit obnoxious, I don't mind that.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of part of the thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean,
you get the comeuppance.
Yeah. I mean, Mick Herron's brilliant at that in his books. He's phenomenal the way he writes. But yes, absolutely, to write odious characters. But I suppose it's the same when you watch a TV thing, and the villains. We all like to like a baddie, and live vicariously through them, and thank our stars that we're not them. And you can still enjoy the story, yes, and wait for their comeuppance. Exactly.
I'm going to go on, carry on.
No, I think weirdly, in The Lizard and in Second Skin, I very much enjoy writing the baddies, almost, again, without giving it away, because there's you'll know what I mean in that, those that have read it. But I particularly, there's one character in particular that I really like writing, weirdly, more than the main character, or rather, it comes more easily, even though I'm nothing like that person, and I am much more like the main character. So
I'm going to read you some comments from Donna on the stream.
Okay.
Just because they're very nice. She said good evening to both of us. She also said that these chats of ours are costing her a fortune.
Oh gosh, sorry, Donna.
It's a good thing, because I presume that means she's off to buy your book. And then she said, will you ever get bored of telling the stories of your life? Because she imagines she could talk to you for hours.
Oh, that's wonderful. I won't get bored of doing them. As long as I live long enough to tell them. I mean, I lived in Cyprus, Austria, Germany, Lagos, Nigeria, and I want to try and set a story in. I want to take it through each of those, and I have very strong memories of all those places. So I hope to keep doing that. Although I think I have to grow up, someone put it, and get out of the 1990s and move into the world of the internet. I think one of the reasons why I wrote the first book and the second is because I think it's very hard to be on the run nowadays, truly on the run and isolated, because you just need to get a mobile phone, click on something, and you can tap your way out of anything. But I suppose it's easy enough. You just, your protagonist drops their phone in the water and you can't use it. But anyway, that's a very nice comment. Thank you. I hope I keep writing more. I hope you enjoy the stories.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess like maybe setting them a little bit back, although then do they then become historical fiction?
Yeah.
Isn't there a point that like the 80s is historical fiction now?
Is it? Oh my gosh, that dates me. Yes, I didn't know that.
Which is slightly depressing. But...
It is slightly depressing. But I take comfort in the fact that, Charles Cumming has just written, he and I, without discussing it, we've written books in quite similar time. There's 94 and then 98. He jumps between two as well. Not comparing the two books because they're very different. But I think I at least, I'm not going to go back anyway. So I'm now at 94. Book 3 is 95, 96. And then I don't know whether to drop the character for a bit and write some. I've got 3 or 4 ideas for other completely different kinds of novels, quite high concept novels. But then my writing mentor and agent says, no, you've got to keep going with this, because he thinks there's still a long way to go with the character. I thought about jumping to when he's 50 and retired and getting pulled back into action by the Prime Minister on the beach when he's shaping surfboards in Croydon, Devon, which is somewhere I spent a lot of time. And then he said, no, don't do that. You've still got 30 years of stories to get out of him before you retire.
That's quite good. Yeah, I like the 90s though. I think Donna said as well, don't give up on the 90s. They're great.
Yeah, well, no, I agree. And also it was a really interesting time because I left drama school in 94. And I remember, we had Nirvana. I'd never heard anything like Nirvana coming through. And then we had, the Secret Service actually changed its whole remit in 94 and they became an official government organization rather than, everyone knew about them, but they were secret. So that's interesting from an espionage point of view. And also then you've got the whole shift in Europe and the music and the culture. I love the 90s. I love the 80s, but the 90s was a good time. And I was traveling the world with the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time in 94 and 95 for about 12 months all over the world. So I have a very strong memory of it from a storytelling point of view. No, bring on the 90s. I still think the 80s music is best, but I'm probably biased. But the 90s was good. Radiohead was fantastic.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll give you the 80s music. There was some classic stuff in the 90s as well, though.
Yeah, well, a lot of yes, and a lot of not one-hit wonders. Maybe I just sound like like our grandparents did to us when they were talking about all the music sounds the same. It's a cliche to say it sounds the same, but listening to the top 40 now, it does to me sound slightly the same. But there was a band. Do you remember the Seahorses? Do you remember the Seahorses?
Yeah,
they had a song called "Love Is the Law," and the guitarist was John Squire from Ding 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 Stone Roses. But there were some great hits in the 90s. Coffee and TV, Blur. Not that they were a one-hit wonder, of course. Yeah, no, there's some great music in there. I remember Ace of Base, All That She Wants. I remember that from my clubbing days at drama school. I think they were pretty much a one-hit wonder. And then I Get Knocked Down, but I Get Up Again. Chumbawamba. I think they were called that. Or top. Anyway, sorry. Your listeners or watchers are probably laughing right now.
I think they were a Yorkshire band.
Were they?
We've got a lot to answer for in Yorkshire.
Yorkshire's great. In fact, funny enough, one of my main characters in the next book is from Yorkshire. I've just written him in. I'm on chapter 2 at the moment. I mean, it all changes so much. It's great. You get to chapter 9 and you suddenly think, oh, I need a way out of this. And you go, well, if that person was connected to that, then you go back and do a couple of tweaks. And so I never really know who the baddies are completely, or the goodies, apart from the protagonist. And as you know,
I'm
sorry,
intrigued about how you're going to get him to Vienna.
say again, sorry.
I'm intrigued about how you're going to get him over to Austria.
Well, you mean how he gets there?
Yeah.
Well, he's an English teacher. He's a foreign language, so he's a TEFL or EFL, English language. Yes, he teaches English as a foreign language, which is something that I wanted to do too. But again, I didn't let me into that job either. I think it's something I could do now, certainly. And I do teach and direct drama students and stuff. But so I can sort of tell you the opening premise ish. It'll change, but he is about to start. His flatmate keeps telling him he's got to kind of get it. If he wants to settle down, he's got to get a proper job. He wants to attract a life partner. He can't go on teaching students English, and then he gets approached by someone via the school he's working at in Charing Cross, who says that they've got an opening in Vienna, close to the Vienna International Centre, and would he be interested? And on the condition that he's happy to keep his ear to the ground and do a little social networking and make connections, which of course is very much underplayed when he gets out there. So he thinks he's got a year out there sabbatical, but then he finds out what they really expect of him, and that I can't tell you that yet because I haven't written it. I do know, but it might change. But I don't want it to spoil anything.
How much of it changes as you go then? So, when you're starting off with this, so the first one was quite a labour of love, but obviously book 2, when you've written that, you've done it in less time. How much of it do you kind of know from the get-go, and how much do you just kind of work out as you go?
The latter. I work the whole thing out as I go. I start with the opening chapter, and I get and I roughly knew where the ending had to go, and I knew roughly what I wanted to happen. But as with the first one, the same thing. I knew the beginning, and then I eventually worked out what had to happen in the end. And in between, I literally went chapter by chapter. And I think writing in the first person, you can do that because everything happens in real time. I think it's much harder, a bit like writing now with the internet, to write in third person. It's more, I think it opens up more possibilities because you can write from different perspectives and you can trick more and you can bring it all together. I love reading books in the third person and that device. I think James Patterson writes in both. With the president, he writes in first and third person, which I was tempted to try on this. But with the first person, you don't need to and I remember a friend of mine said, whatever you do, you must read Stephen King's On Writing. And Stephen King, other than very much being responsible for me slashing all my adjectives. So, you've got to slash the adjectives, keep it simple, let the audience invent the color. You write in black and white, they perceive the color in picture. But he said, get your protagonist in a tight spot and then get them to get out of it and then give them another tight spot and just keep going like that. Every time they get out of it, put something else in the way. And that's what I did in The Lizard. In the second book, it was more complex than that. Because actually there are things going on that the reader doesn't know, that the protagonist doesn't know, that even the people in the story, the baddies who think they're in control, don't know. So in a sense, it was harder to write because I had to keep a grip on what everybody knew. Whereas in the first one, he's on the run, he's being chased, he thinks he knows something, he's got to escape capture. It's quite simple. This one is, who is the baddie? Who's the real baddie? And he's continually suspicious, having been made paranoid from his earlier experiences. I think I've lost track of what the question you asked. I think
it was a good answer, though. So don't worry about it.
Okay, good.
It's really hard to ask you some of the questions I want to ask, actually, because we can't give away spoilers. But there's some fantastic characters that are side characters in this. Do you think you'd ever be tempted to do any kind of spin-off stories about some of the characters?
So if I was to say to you, Xander, the drug-taking ex-rock star husband of Amara, there's definitely a story there without going into it. But there's a few of them. For instance, Gerald, who he meets who's MI6. I thought about bringing him back. I mean, I'm thinking, I can't. Yes, it's so funny. It's hard. I can't give away anything. But
no, it's so hard to not give away. There's a girl in it who I really liked as a
Kate,
character. Yeah.
she, without giving it away, she's in book 3. There, I gave it away, but no one will know what that means until they've read it. I agree with you. What I love about the Kate character is that she gives all the guys as good as they give and more. She's kind of sort of a James Bond type character, and I really like her character. I like the way, and I can see a future for a double act there.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
No, it really does. But there's so many of them that you were saying, like Gerald and Xander, you would absolutely read like a story about them as well. Like even if it was just how they got to the point where they are in Second Skin.
Yeah. Oh, you mean like going back?
I mean, going forward as well, they'd be they'd be interesting. But going back and finding their backstory would be interesting as well.
Yes, because they both have very well, all of them, and Kate too. The way she's brought up and the things she's had to go through, you know, trying to join the French Foreign Legion and all that sort of thing. And Xander being a pop star and would have been, I suppose, the 80s that time, or one-hit wonder, and Gerald with his MI6 pretensions at uni in Athens. Yeah, it's true. There's the first book, The Lizard, has been optioned for television, and I've written the pilot episode for that. Now, with all these things, they quite often never happen, and options run out. But I remember the producers talking about that, going exactly what you just mentioned. You can go back as well as forward, as in those characters in The Lizard, how they came to be where they are.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about it being optioned, because it feels, and I'm wondering if this goes back to your kind of career in acting, because it does feel like it would be a very good kind of visual thing. You know what I mean? Like a good play or TV show or film.
Well, a lot of people that have read it have mentioned that, and oddly, some of the less generous comments I noticed on the days when I forced myself to read the reviews think that I wrote it purely to, you know, in the style of putting it into TV and film, which was never the idea. I just wanted to write a page turner. But I think the setting of Greece, I think the fact that it is full of adventure, the first one certainly, does lend itself to, you know, an escape around the. I mean, it's easy watching really, and it's a good setting, and lots of people know Greece. It's particularly sort of a favorite amongst many European, you know, holidaymaker destinations. So yes, funnily enough, a lot of, I mean, sort of comparisons like The Night Manager, The Tourist, The Talented Mr. Ripley, the relationships between sort of the innocent and the guy that leads him astray. Everything, even to Cocktail, you know, with Tom Cruise and what's his name, Brian Brown. That great film feels dated now, but I think it does lend itself. The responses so far, I think a lot of other people have got the same idea, and the feedback at the moment seems to be that they've either got something like it in the pipeline, or because of the writer's strike, actors strike last year, things are being delayed. So I'm just quietly getting on with writing and not worrying too much about it. It would be nice, of course. There's no part in it for me, unfortunately.
Well, I was going to say one of our favourite questions to ask in the group is, if it was adapted, what would you like to play in it? But then obviously you could play someone in it, because you do have a background in acting. Normally we just ask this to any author who might not have any acting experience.
I'm too old to play, obviously, the main chap. Yes, of course, because they asked me, producer, you know, who do you see playing this? Funny enough, a friend of mine, Mark Warren, who's a very successful TV actor. Yeah, he really wants to play Ricky. He's too old to play Ricky, but he signed up and said, "Listen, I'll play Ricky if you get this made." But the producers want someone in their 30s, and Mark is my age. I'd probably want to play Ricky too, but I'm too old to play him. I don't know if my Australian accent's good enough. I won't attempt it now. I don't think I'd want to play Heinrich. He's too sleazy in the first one. In the second one, probably Gerald by the time it gets made. Maybe I'll be Gerald. I mean, he's in his 50s, yeah.
That would be good.
Yes, if that was the case, then I'd obviously write his part much bigger.
Because like the other thing I was going to ask you said you've already written the pilot episode, was how much you'd want to be involved. Because does this, because we talked about the fact that it might have helped you when you were writing it because of your background, but would that affect it if you were seeing the adaptation made because you've got more knowledge of like the processes and things? Would you have more of an opinion? Would you be more grumpy if they made something wrong?
Yes, I think I would. I mean, the contract took nearly a year to draw up, precisely for all those reasons, like how would you want it cast, this and that, and the current zeitgeist is definitely not what it was in the 80s in terms of the way things are, the storytelling, for all the right reasons, but also if you're doing something in the 80s, you have to represent what it was then, and there was all sorts of difficult conversations about who and what, who could play what, and in the end, being a first-time writer and a first time someone had anything optioned, you also have to sort of slightly take what you get, and then if the first thing is made, you then have the power to go, right, now for the second one, I'm going to decide. But actually they were very good at, because I made the point that the story is fairly specific. It was quite easy to write, although I had to learn to cut all the scenes shorter, because of course, or the other problem is that in a book, in one paragraph, you can jump 6 weeks. With a few sentences, you can set the scene. In TV, you could do a montage, but you have to write the montage. You have to decide, what happens in that montage. But no, I think I would want to have some say in it. But I have a friend who's a director who was also on board to direct it, and if he was involved, then I would be definitely part of that. Be easier. But equally, if another producer takes it on, they might just say, look, we don't want you to have anything to do with it. We will buy the option and have our very talented writers, in which case I'd be very happy for that too, because in one sense, I'd probably rather hand it over to people who know what they're doing rather than, a first-time screenwriter.
Donna's winning you over with all the comments now. She says she don't look a day over 30.
Donna, that's very kind. Whereabouts in Yorkshire is Donna? Where are you?
Donna's not based in Yorkshire. She's in Luton.
Oh, okay.
Area.
Okay.
And just in case I offend her by telling her the wrong town.
Yeah, I'll go with 30. It's because I've got my special 30 screensaver app on the computer. Yeah.
That's so funny. So what I'm intrigued as to, because she said obviously there's further stories that you're going to tell with this character.
Yeah.
Because we've got book 3. Your agent wants you to write more than book 3, which is good. Like, you definitely should write more than book 3. But I'm interested in these other story ideas you've got. Are you going to stick in the kind of genre, or would you go out of the genre? Is it?
I think, no, I'm going to stick in the genre. I actually started writing another book, which was more procedural, but I stopped because I suddenly realized I had to research detective inspector this and that and who comes first. And it just suddenly felt like hard work. And I bought various books, and obviously I've seen countless detective series, but you can't just write and then this happens, because it's got to be done by practice. And which is why I went back to the series and wrote the second book rather than the idea. But I did have an idea that it's fairly macabre, but it's a crime thriller. But one that the high concept one is to do with thought about be able to invade other people's thoughts the way it's going now, with AI and chips. And I thought, well, someone else is going to write that. I had another idea once, and then found out somebody made a film about it, about putting chips in mobile phones, which then affected the way you behaved. And it was all to do with marketing. And the person that designed it was a retired IT designer living in LA, designing surfboards. And then suddenly one morning, there's all these disasters across the planet. And they track it down to him, and they think that he's been involved in this massive terrorist act. But actually, he sold it to someone, didn't get any money for it, but he does have the answer. So he ends up on the run from the baddies, but also trying to solve this imminent war. I'm quite intrigued by world disaster, I think. A disaster movie story, I think, is something I'd like to write.
Yeah, like a dystopian.
Yes, exactly. Like The Road. I love the idea of electricity, everything going down, and suddenly complete pandemonium taking over, and you have to look after your family, your friends, and you have to reserve the petrol, you have to arm yourself with a shotgun, and you just have to survive. I don't know where you go or what you do, and I know that those stories have been done, but it is appealing, and every now and then with all these awful things on the internet about nuclear war and World War III, and part of me does, think, gosh, is this actually going to happen? And then thinking, well, it doesn't matter what you write because no one's going to ever read it anyway. So it's a strange, I try not to think about those things. But no, I've got quite a few ideas. I don't want to tell you, well, one of them I'm particularly pleased with, but I don't want someone to steal it. So I can't.
No, don't give it away.
No, but I to you because I'd be keen to know what you thought. But
there's some comments on here about there being a lot of procedurals. I mean, there are some excellent people who can advise you on procedure.
Yeah.
And things out there in the world.
No, it's true. And actually, I have got a couple of email addresses now of people I've met on holiday, Tenerife, funny enough. I met a very senior detective woman who had a child that was playing with mine, and she's fantastic. She had no idea what she did. She was a criminal chief inspector, and I said, oh gosh, I've got to take your address because one day I'm going to write this story, and I just need. And she's based in Sheffield, I think, and she said, yeah, absolutely. So I've got a, and then someone who's a head of a division here in the Met Police as well. But it seems like there's a lot of that to get around.
Yeah.
But then I suppose someone might say, well, there's been lots of crime and adventure thrillers. So
I think you've just got to do it in your way. So I think like these, obviously, with everything you've told us today, there's a real reason why you've written these stories, and you can tell that there's a sort of a meaning kind of with that. And I think that makes the writing better. So I think maybe writing the things that you love is the way to go.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Because I think at least then, if nothing else, you're enjoying the process. And a bit like acting and playing music, if you're enjoying it, if you're really enjoying it, then other people might enjoy it. If it's hard work, then I think it's harder for other people to enjoy it. I think that's right.
And I think there's a lot of kind of really good kind of speculative crime kind of coming out now, which is blending that, the kind of big what if kind of dystopian sort of disaster style, slightly in the future ideas with crime fiction, and that's getting to be very popular again.
Yeah.
So
yes, there's so much reading I've got to do. Not enough holidays to do it in, because I find it hard to read without being on holiday. And I think the more you read, the more ideas you have, obviously, too. Because I think that cliche. What's cliche? The saying that everyone has a novel in them, and I'd like to think that I've got more than that one. Even that's based on. I can see why people say that, because you base it on something that's happened to you. But it's funny. I'm not a huge theatre goer, even though I like being in plays. I love watching all kinds of TV and film. I can watch anything on TV and film. But the same with reading. I find the minute I read something that's brilliant, I go, oh gosh, am I writing so terrible compared to that? or I read something and go, how did that get published? I go, at least mine's better than that. All these silly thoughts that you think to make yourself, to get you back to the keyboard to keep writing.
So, yeah, my favourite question to ask at the moment is, what have you read recently and enjoyed?
I'm going through a real phase of autobiographies and biographies right now, and one of the most brilliant book I've just read is Storyteller, Dave Grohl, the frontman of Foo Fighters and drummer from Nirvana. Beautiful story writing. I've just read Simple Minds autobiography, brilliant. Duran, and Oasis, the drummer that was kicked out of Oasis. Just that his telling of the 90s is astonishing. In terms of novels, when was the last? I'm trying to look at the last novel I read. It's been a long time. Kennedy 35, of course. Charles Cumming, brilliant. I want to get back to Mick Herron, but when I read his first one, I was so blown away by his ability to write his characters and his turns of phrase and the way he writes sentences that I just thought, I can't. It's too good. I have to wait until I'm not writing a story. I think if you're one of the best books I've ever read is this. I don't know if have you read this?
I think I have.
It's been made into a TV thing, apparently. It's about a writer on the East. It's originally set in a Swiss writer, but he's a writer, and a young girl, 16-year-old, is found murdered in his garden with a copy of her script. And of course, he's accused of murder, and he has to try and prove that he isn't. And it's got more twist than you could ever possibly imagine. And I don't know how he writes it, but it's absolutely gripping. It's gripping. It's all about story. Within it, he's trying to write a novel as well as get himself off the hook. I've read it twice, actually. Yeah.
Good recommendation. A good choice doing an author chat right by your bookshelves as well.
Yeah. I've read the Ben McIntyre, Spy Among Friends. It's brilliant. Read that in Greece recently. True story, extraordinary. Although apparently it's a film with Damian Lewis about Kim Philby. I had tea with Kim Philby's niece, as you do, at the RAF Club on Piccadilly not that long ago. She was friends with my granny who lived to 103.
Wow. Did you go to the spy panel at Harrogate? Wasn't there a panel about spy things?
Yes, there probably was. I didn't. I was literally. I could only get up there for the Friday night, and then I had to leave at 9 o'clock on Saturday. It was very hot that night. Very, very hot. So I didn't see any panels. Unfortunately, but had a good time there.
Yeah, I think that's the best way, to be fair.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yorkshire was looking as lovely as it ever has. It's amazing when the sun comes out on those stone walls and the fells. Yeah, it's quite something.
Right, you've got a minute left. So remind all the people who are watching who've really enjoyed listening to you telling us all the stories about why you've written the book and things, what they're going to go away and buy.
What are they going to go away and buy?
Oh, yeah.
Do you mean this?
Yeah.
But you also
maybe the Lizard as well.
You have to. The Lizard. A terrific atmospheric thriller, outstanding. William Boyd. I met William Boyd. In fact, I read his first book in the house where he set it in Nigeria, but that's another story for another time. We did a sitting page turner, The Guardian. I think that's my most pleasing because I aim to write, a page turner, not some prize-winning novel. But yeah, The Lizard, 1980s Greece, summer holiday reading and winter reading when you're feeling cold and in need of sunshine. And yet you can read this first, but as Kaz says, I would maybe start with that and then go to that because this comes out in paperback next year. Read that first, then that. I did the audiobook for those that like audiobooks, but I hate hearing myself speak. I've narrated a few audiobooks. But I'd read the book. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to me narrating it. Read the book.
Oh, audiobooks if you narrated. That's interesting.
Oh gosh, I've done 40 or 50 now.
Really?
Yeah. Done a lot of natural history stuff about birds, and I've done a lot about terrorism. I read a lot of German stuff because I speak German, about the history of the Third Reich and the Nazis. I read Bernard Cornwell's Waterloo, though I've read a few Admiral Nelson. I've read a few novels. A book on spies by Calder Walton recently. A book called Putin's People, about Putin, and a lot of journalists taking their name out of the book once it was published. That was interesting, having to do all the rewrites, having to do the re-records. But yes, no, I've done. If you go to Audible and Google my name, you'll see all the books that I've done. I forget them as soon as I've done them. It's very hard to remember a book when you're narrating it, because the more you get caught up reading it, the more you start fluffing. So you have to be detached.
Makes sense. And then all that's left for me to say after all of that is thank you. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Have a good evening.
You too.
And yeah,